Resale is cheaper, so it must be safer. That's actually what a lot of buyers think. But is that really true? And is that even the right question to be asking right now? So 2026 has been quite a year so far, hasn't it? We've seen land prices move up, property prices continuing to climb, and on top of that, we also saw the recent EC policy changes, which I'll be covering in another episode. Hi everyone, my name is Amanda, and today in episode 2 of Does Cheaper Mean Safer? I'll be covering a few important points that you have to understand before you choose to take any action this year. So what I've noticed from speaking to my clients recently is that a lot of them actually didn't realize that these new policy changes don't just affect EC buyers. They actually indirectly shift where demand is going next in the market as well. So why am I bringing this up in episode 2? Because I feel like there's just so much noise out there right now. Everyone has an opinion, everyone has a take, and it can get really overwhelming trying to figure out what's actually relevant to your situation. So today I want to try and cut through all of that, because if you haven't made a move yet, or you've been looking around for a while, or you're just trying to make sense why the market is still so hot, I feel that the question isn't really should you buy or not anymore. The more important question is, how should you be positioning yourself moving forward in the second half of 2026? Should you be looking at new launches? Should you be looking at resale? Or staying put will be the best for now? Or has the market already shifted in a way that changes how you should be even thinking about this? And I think that's the most important conversation we need to have today. Because as many of you have noticed, the market has already started moving. And that's the reason why we're seeing projects like Hudson Place performing relatively well, even without being that typical MRT doorstep location that buyers usually go for. Let's walk through what has happened, what's coming, and how to think about your next step before you commit. So here's what we are going to cover today. We'll start with how to position yourself in the second half of 2026, then look at where future prices are heading and whether waiting actually will cost you more. From there, we'll get into the hidden risk of resale properties, which I think is the part most people don't think about enough. Then we'll talk about whether new launch prices are really as high as they seem, do a proper new launch versus resale comparison, and finally, I'll share how I actually identify a safe buy for my clients. So let me just take a quick step back first, because I think this context is really very important. What you're looking at on screen right now is actually a breakdown of land prices across different parts of Singapore, and later on, I'll tie this back to the actual launch price. To make this easier to follow, the different colors represent different regions. So orange being the CCR, which is your core central region, blue being RCR, which is your city fringe, and black is the OCR, which is more mass market, suburban areas of Singapore. Now, why am I showing you all this? Because land prices is honestly one of the clearest signals that we have of where future launch prices are heading. So let me just walk you through some examples. Sky at Holland, the developer, bought the land at 1,285 per square foot per plot ratio. And when it launched, it averaged around 2,950 per square foot. Penrith at Queenstown, land cost was 1,154 per square foot per plot ratio. Prices at launch were averaging at about 2,800 per square foot. Even if we take a look at Faber, which had a lower land cost of $900 PSF PPR, still averaged at around $2,100 per square foot during launch day. And if you look at the stronger city fringe and central launches like Zion and Promenade Peak, which developers have bought their land at 1,200 to 1,300 PSF per plot ratio, prices have hit ranging around 3,050 PSF. Now, here's what I really want you to notice, because it's not just the individual numbers, but the pattern. Because a lot of these projects that launched recently, the developers secured the land much earlier at older and cheaper prices. So what we've been seeing in the market so far, is actually really the old price cycle playing out. And that really matters because what comes next may look very different from this. And honestly, what's more important to me now is not what has already happened. The real question is, what is going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months? And this is the part I really want you to pay attention to, because based on what we are seeing today, there's actually a 30% price wave ahead of us. So what do I mean by that? If you look at the right side of the chart, these are the newer land bids that have come in. So Bayshore, which is Vela Bay, land bought at 1,388 per square foot per plot ratio. Hougang at 1,179 per square foot per plot ratio. And if you compare that against what we saw earlier, $900, 1,002 to 1,003 per square foot per plot ratio, it tells us one thing. The next wave of launches is very unlikely to be priced based on the old benchmark prices anymore. And this really isn't just a prediction because Vela Bay has already launched at an average at 2,886 per square foot. So what's coming is already showing up in the market right now. So what does this actually mean for you as a buyer today? Let me just put it in simple terms. So say your budget today is $1.5 million. And right now, depending on location, you can still look at a 2-bed, 2-bath in the new launch market, maybe even slightly bigger option in the resale, being a 2+ study, or even a 3-bedroom compact. But here's the honest question. Do you think your budget is going to grow in the next 6 months? Most likely not. Your budget stays the same. But what about your options? They might start to shrink. Because 6 to 12 months down the road, that same $1.5 million over here might only stretch to a 2-bed, 1-bath in the new launch market. And in resale, what used to give you a 2+ study or even a 3-bedroom might now just become a 2-bed, 2-bath. Same budget that you see, fewer choices. And I know some of you are thinking, never mind Amanda, I'll just wait, try my luck at the next ballot. And if it doesn't work out, I'll just look at resale law. And honestly, that's a very normal reaction and I completely get it. But this is also where I see a lot of buyers catch themselves off guard. Because if new launch prices are moving up, resale prices will tend to move with them too. So waiting doesn't automatically mean that you get a better deal later. Sometimes it just means you end up paying more for less. I just want to be clear also, I'm not saying that you must buy right now. And I'm definitely not saying that new launch is always the right answer. What I'm really asking you to think about is this. Would you rather make a decision when your budget still gives you the options and flexibility? Or would you rather wait and then find yourself having to compromise? Because the market has moved on without you. Because projects like Sky at Holland, Henry, Zion Grand, River Modern, for most buyers, that window has already passed. That cycle is done. So the question now is really about what's ahead and how you want to position yourself before the next step up kicks in. So now let's take a look at the other side of the equation. Because as buyers right now, we really have two options. Either we look at a new launch, either we look at resale. So even before we get into whether resale is a good or bad choice, I think it's worth understanding what the actual risk looks like when you buy a resale property today. Let me just walk you through a simple example. It's 2026, you decide to buy a resale property at $1.5 million. Now, the first question I always ask my clients is this: when is the earliest you can realistically sell? Because when you factor in your holding period, your transaction costs, and giving yourself actually enough time for the price to actually move, for most buyers, your next realistic exit point after SSD is going to be around 2030. So you enter at $1.5 million in 2026, and your earliest realistic exit is 4 years later in 2030. Now, obviously, nobody buys a property hoping to sell it at the same price they paid for. You want to sell it higher because once you add everything up, your stamp duty, legal fees, interests, renovations, agent fees, your costs are already stacking up before you even think about profit. So the real question becomes, how much do you actually need to sell for in 2030 for this whole thing to make sense? So for the sake of illustration purposes, you bought a home at $1.5 million and your target to sell is in 2030. That's $300,000 profit. Sounds very reasonable. But here's where it gets interesting. Can you imagine if your neighbor also decides to sell around the same time? And of course, you're going to look at how much you're listing at, which is at 1.8 million, because that becomes their reference point and benchmark also. Now, most people would think, okay, that's fine. We're all in this together to profit. Okay, so here's the thing that most people don't realize. Some of your neighbors in that development, they could very well be the first owners, which means that their entry price is very different from yours. So can you imagine you bought your home $1.5 million in 2026, but your neighbor next door bought the same type of unit years ago at $1.1 million, even $1 million to potentially $1.2 million. So my question to you is, does that person need to sell at $1.8 million to make a profit? Absolutely not. They can easily sell at 1.4 million, maybe even 1.5 million, and still walk away with a very healthy gain. But what about you now? You can't afford to do that because you came in much later at a much higher price. And once you stack up all of your costs, same thing, stamp duties, legal fees, interest, property tax, renovation, agent fees, your actual breakdown is probably now closer to 1.6 to 1.65 million, not 1.5 million anymore. So now here's where it gets really tricky, because if your neighbor sells first at 1.4 or even 1.5 million dollars, that becomes the benchmark. This is the number future buyers will reference against. That is also what affects your bank valuation. And suddenly, you're just trying to justify an asking price of $1.6 to $1.65 million when surrounding transactions are sitting at 1.4 to 1.5 million. So can you imagine being that buyer looking at your unit over here? Even if yours has the best renovation, best facing, highest floor, would you personally as a buyer pay $150,000 to $200,000 above what every other unit nearby just transacted at? Most people wouldn't lah. And that's the exit risk that most buyers simply don't see coming when they enter resale at today's prices. So I want to be clear with you guys. I'm not saying that resale is a bad choice, because there are definitely resale properties that make sense. But what I really want to share with you is that cheaper today does not automatically mean that it's safer. The real question is, when you eventually need to sell, can the market actually support the price that you need for your exit? Because your neighbor can simply undercut you and still make money. But if I can be very honest, you do not have that same flexibility. And that's the part worth thinking about before you commit. And that brings me to the next part, because yes, resale definitely has its risks. But does that mean new launch is automatically the better choice? Not necessarily. New launches also have their own risks. And honestly, I hear this all the time. The moment I bring up new launch, people will automatically go, Amanda, new launch, so expensive now. Why would I even consider it? And I totally get it, because that's a very fair reaction. In fact, a lot of people I speak to will immediately think, yeah, just another agent trying to push me towards new launch. And because of that, they shut off the option completely before even looking at it properly. And then they convince themselves because resale is cheaper, confirm safer lah. But that's actually not what I'm here to do. My goal is really just to help you guys look at both sides properly so you can make a decision that actually makes sense for your own situation. Because if resale works for you and you're okay with the risks that it may come along, go for it. And if new launch makes more sense, then of course go for that. There's really no one-size-fits-all answer when it comes to real estate. But what do I think? What I do think is important though, is that you don't rule out an option purely based on emotions. Because the real question isn't whether is new launch expensive. The real question we should be asking is it expensive relative to what? Relative to surrounding properties nearby, relative to what's launching next, or relative nearby projects, or even future land costs. Because yes, some new launches are genuinely overpriced and risky, that I will not deny. But there are also projects where even though the headlines per square foot looks high, the actual entry position is safer than most buyers realize. And that's exactly what I want to show you next, because it is how I personally determine whether a new launch project is risky or even worth considering before I even share it with my clients. So let me just walk you through a simple example. Property A is a resale unit selling at $2,000 per square foot. And just nearby, property B is a new launch coming in at 2008 PSF. Now, if you're a buyer looking at this, which one feels safer? Most of you would say that it's property A, because in fact, on paper, it's already $800 PSF cheaper. And honestly, that's where most buyers just stop and go for the cheaper option. Resale cheaper? new launch too expensive, I don't want to think anymore. That's usually what goes through a buyer's mind. And I totally get it. That's a very natural reaction. But let me just take this one step further. Now, what if I told you, right, that right next to property A, there's also a property C, which is also a new launch development. But instead of $2,800 PSF, it's coming in the market at around $2,000 per square foot. The whole comparison will change now because we're no longer talking about a $2,000 resale versus a $2,800 new launch. We're comparing a $2,000 per square foot resale property against a maybe $2,200 per square foot new launch. And this is where I want you to pause and really think about if the prices are actually similar, which one puts you in a better position? Would you rather buy into resale, where some of the first owners came in at $1 million or $1.1 million, and one day when you want to exit, they can potentially undercut you and still make good money? Or would you rather come in together with everyone else around the same price point, where the playing field is a lot more level? Most times when we think about it this way, we would say, okay, property C actually makes more sense. And it's actually quite simple when you think about it. And I like to use this analogy because it's easy to understand. Okay? If someone told you an iPhone 15 and an iPhone 17 are going for the same price, which one are you going to pick? Obviously, the newer one, ma. So it's the same logic here. So why am I sharing this? Because a lot of buyers hear new launch and immediately assume it's going to be way more expensive. And sometimes, yes, that's totally true. But there are parts of Singapore where projects like Property C actually do exist, where the pricing isn't that far off from the surrounding resale properties nearby. And when that happens, the question completely changes again, because it's no longer about which one is cheaper already. The real question becomes, right, at a similar price point, which project actually gives you the safer entry today? And this is something I want you to think about and walk away with. So after everything I've shared, I hope one thing is becoming clearer. The question was never really about resale or new launch. The real question would be which one would give you a safer entry position today. And this is how I look at it when I'm working through options with my clients. So number one, what are the surrounding benchmark prices? Am I looking at something that's already too far-fetched and sky-high, or is the entry price still reasonable relative to what's around it? Because where and when you enter actually matters a lot more than most people think. Also, what's the age profile of the surrounding projects? Because if you're buying into something that's already quite old and there are newer options coming into the same area, that will directly affect how your unit is going to be positioned when you eventually want to sell. Because age affects buyer demand, and it definitely will affect how much of a leverage you have with your property when you eventually are looking to sell. Lastly, what are the potential prices of future supply coming into that area? Because if the next launches are coming in higher, that will actually help support your entry price today. But if supply is coming in cheaper, then you really have to ask yourself, is your entry today actually still safe? So instead of just thinking resale is cheaper so it's safer, or new launch is expensive so I shouldn't even touch it, the better question is really, where can you position yourself today based on the surrounding benchmarks, the age of properties that's around you, and what's likely coming next. And once you start thinking about it this way, the decision actually becomes a lot clearer. Sometimes resale will make more sense. Sometimes new launch is the smarter move. But the goal was never just to buy a property. The goal is to buy into the right positioning with the right strategy so that we can become much better off in our future than where we are today. So to sum up everything together, this is actually something I share quite regularly with my clients. Okay, and it's called the V-shaped strategy. It sounds fancy, but honestly, it's very simple. The whole idea is this: how do we buy low today while still making sure we can sell well in the future? So on one side of the V, what we're asking is, today's entry still safe? Are we buying at a land cost that still makes sense? Are we really getting in before the next price benchmark moves up? And also, are the holding costs actually still manageable? And this is to buy low. And on the other side, we will ask ourselves, What's going to support my exit later? Will future launches in the area come in higher? Will surrounding transactions be able to support my exit? Will this property still look attractive to the next buyer down the road? And if both sides of that V make sense, that's what I call a good entry window. And it looks different for everyone. Sometimes it means moving from a non-harmonized project to a harmonized one. Sometimes it means upgrading into a better location, like moving out from a HDB into a private or even into a better district. And sometimes it actually means going for a bigger unit at a lower per square foot or lower overall quantum. The point is, it's never just about buying a property. It's more about buying into the right position at the right window of opportunity. So to wrap up, it was never really about new launch versus resale for me. What I'm actually looking at is where the policies are shifting, because that's where demand will follow, and what land prices are telling us about where the next benchmark is going to be for us. And of course, whether your entry today is still safe relative to what's coming next. Because to be very honest, not every new launch is a safe buy. And not every resale is the safer option to take either. That's really the whole point of this video. So the question I want to leave you guys with is this. With your budget today, where can you position yourself in the best possible way before your choices really starts to shrink? And if you want help mapping out your own options based on your budget and situation, you know how to find me. Just scan the QR code. And whether it's questions about what's happening in the market or you just want to talk through your own situation with me, feel free to reach out to me anytime. Now, if you found this helpful, do take a moment to like and subscribe. It really does help me reach more people who need this kind of content. Once again, my name is Amanda, and I'll see you in the next episode.